Many people consider the dice roll to be the most important parts of a match, though they're usually referring to one that determines whether you go first or second. In this video, we're going over the best cards in the game with an effect that roll dice. Starting us off at number 10, we have Roulette Barrel. This is a level 4 light machine monster with 1000 attack and 2000 defense. It can, once per turn, roll a 6-sided dice, and then you can pop a monster in the field whose level is equal to one of the results. Roulette Barrel saw some play as a tech option in some earlier Yu-Gi-Oh formats. This is because back then, the game was focused almost entirely on the Chaos monsters, who all needed to banish a light and dark monster from your graveyard to special summon themselves. While there was no shortage of good dark monsters to run, with the likes of Break the Magical Warrior, Sandgan, Mystic Tomato, you were a bit limited when it came to light monsters. It didn't help that one of the best lights from the time, DD Warrior Lady, banished itself if you ever used its effect either. This made people opt for some weirder options just to fill their light count quota, and Roulette Barrel was just barely good enough to see play. While its effect only has a 1 in 3 effect to destroy an opponent's monster most of the time, being able to get rid of one of your opponent's recruiters or monarchs for free was something no other card could do. While it wasn't the best stat-wise either, well at least when it came to attack, at least it was a 2000 defense defender. Just good enough to live through a battle phase to be used as tribute fodder on your next turn. Being a defensive wall with a small added upside was just barely good enough to let it see some play. But you were probably better off playing a more proactive card like Blade Knight in your Chaos deck most of the time. And as more and more lights came out, there was only less and less reason to be on Roulette Barrel, so it hasn't been on a competitive deck since 2005. And now at number 9, we have Dice Jar. This is a level 3 light rock flip monster with meager stats and the effect to make both players roll a 6-sided die when flip face up. The player with the lowest roll then takes damage equal to their opponent's roll times 500. But if the winner rolled a 6, the loser takes 6,000 damage instead. Finally, if both rolls are the same, both players just roll again. When it comes to raw burn damage potential, Dice Jar is probably still the strongest card in the game when it comes to both damage dealt and little setup needed for it. The downside is that, well, you're only going to be burning your opponent about half the time you resolve it, and you're only ever getting the full burn damage less than 15% of the time. Sure, you could increase your odds by using a card like that 6, but at that point you're probably better off just going for a 2-card combo that didn't need to resolve a flip monster, like using Bad Reaction to Samochi with Gift Card. Dice Jar was mostly passed up for consistent means of doing burn damage, such as Death Koala, which just inflicts a flat 400 damage for each card in your opponent's hand. With all of this said, this card did manage to get a couple of tops to its name in the dedicated burn strategies. Mostly as a singleton and often in the side deck where it probably never got sided in, but it was still there. Dice Jar kind of exemplifies why gamble cards rarely see play, as this kind of high risk, high reward gambit isn't suited for real tourneys where you need a consistent win rate to top. Still, there's little that would be more devastating than getting eliminated from a big tourney because your opponent got a natural 6 on a Dice Jar. And at number 8, we have Dark Master Zorc. This is a level 8 Dark Fiend ritual monster with 2700 attack. It can be ritual summoned with contract with the Dark Master. Its effect is that once per turn you can roll a 6-sided die, and then if you roll a 1 or 2, you can destroy all monsters your opponent controls. If it's a 3, 4, or 5, you can destroy one monster your opponent controls, and lastly, if it's a 6, it destroys all monsters you control. Differently from the last spot, Zorc gives you some pretty decent odds of getting a good effect on a dice roll. Still, it makes up for it by having an even more detrimental downside, as if you roll a 6, you're just losing your whole board on the spot. Zorc saw some play in Demise OTK for a bunch of different reasons, but none of them were related to its effect. Since it has the same level as Demise, it could be used as the entire tribute cost for it, and was easily searchable through one of the several ritual searchers like Maju and Senju. Though usually you wanted to summon Demise through advanced ritual art, lots of decks did run a generic ritual summoning card like Contract with Abyss, just in case you'd emptied out your deck of vanillas for advanced ritual art already. The main idea behind Demise OTK was to use advanced ritual art to bring out Demise and dump insects to the graveyard with it, so that you can blow up the field with Demise's effect, and then use Doom Dozer to swing for a lot of damage. Zorc was a fun inclusion in Demise, and it had the small niche of being able to beat over monarchs and Demise itself, but it was never the scariest part of the strategy during any point in which it was viable. And at number 7, we have Speedroid Wheel. This is a quick play spell that requires you to discard a card to be activated, and then you roll a 6-sided die. Afterwards, you get to special summon up to 2 Speedroid monsters from your deck whose total levels equal the result, but their effects are negated. And if you did not have any targets for this card, you lose life points equal to the die's result times 500. Speedroid Wheel, despite being technically a gamble card, is one of the most consistent extenders for dedicated Speedroid decks. While it may seem quite dangerous to leave the effectiveness of your plays up to a dice roll, the result you get with Wheel usually doesn't matter too much. As long as you roll 2 or more, you can use it to get 2 bodies straight from your deck at the small cost of a discard. Pretty much any archetype would love to have a card like this, as cards like Emergency Teleport and Zodiac Barrage, which bring out a single monster from the deck, have both earned themselves places on the Forbidden Limited list for being too strong. While the two monsters do get their effects negated, all the archetype usually needs is having bodies in the field to get into their Link 2 high-speed ride rubber band shooter. From there, you've got many ways to bring back those monsters you summoned from the grave to be able to use their effects, such as Speedroid Recovery, an archetypal monster reborn that gives you follow-up. Even if this card doesn't punish you a lot for rolling low, it still nicely rewards you if you manage to get 4 or higher, as you can bring out monsters with graveyard effects as well, like Speedroid Den Den Daiko Duke. Even if pure Speedroids hasn't been the most meta archetype out there, Speedroid Wheel is still a great example of how good a gamble card has to be for people to want to play it. And at number 6, we have number 67, Paradise Smasher. This is a rank 5 light fairy Xyz monster which can be made with 2 or more level 5 monsters. It has the effect to, during your main phase 1 only, detach 2 materials from itself to make both players roll 2 6-sided dice, and then the player who rolls the highest result cannot activate monster effects or declare an attack until the end of the next turn. Also, once per turn, if a player rolls a die while this card is material, you can treat one of the results as 7. Paradise Smasher has one of the strongest effects in the game locked behind its dice roll. Being able to lock your opponent to monster effects and attacking for a turn is the same as winning the game on the spot against most decks which I've seen play recently. True King of All Calamities had basically the same effect, and it was one of the most hated cards by the player base up until it finally got itself banned as soon as it became easy enough to summon. Paradise Smashers can give you the same effect as it did on a rank 5, but due to the way the effect works, it can just as well backfire and lock you out of the game instead. However, differently from other gamble cards, this monster actually comes with a way to increase the odds of its own effect going through. If you manage to still have Xyz materials after using the effect, which can be done by either making it with 3 level 5s or ranking it up, you get to manipulate one of the dice rolls to be 7. By being able to change one of the results, you actually get way better odds to roll lower than your opponent. They actually come to about 90% or so of being favorable towards you. So why hasn't Paradise Smasher seen play then? Well, because even if 90% is high, it's never guaranteed. Why would you play a combo deck that has a 90% chance to win if combos go through, when you could instead play a deck that locks your opponent out almost as well, but without relying on a gamble instead? And at number 5, we have number 85, Crazy Box. This is a generic rank 4 Dark Fiend monster with 3000 attack. It cannot attack, and once per turn you get to roll a 6-sided die and apply one of its effects depending on its result. If it's 1, your life points get halved. If it's 2, you draw a card. 3, your opponent discards a card. And 4, you get to negate the effects of a face-up card in the field. 5, you destroy a card in the field, and finally 6 makes the card destroy itself. This card actually has a pretty decent chance to give you a good effect after the dice roll. Only 2 out of the 6 aren't beneficial to you, and even then, only one of those will actually make you go minus in card advantage. Still, even though this card did see a lot of play during the Xyz era, it was never because of its effects. Even back then, you didn't really have to gamble if you wanted removal or to draw a card off a rank 4, as you already had Silent Honor Arc, Excited Knight, and Daigusto Emerald to fulfill those kinds of roles. The reason why people played this card was because it was the highest statted rank 4 of the game at 3000 attack, even beating the designated high attack rank 4 of the time, Gem Knight Pearl. Of course, its attack usually wouldn't matter as it can't attack, but this card was played exclusively to be a huge beater while under skill drain. Decks which played this Floodgate usually did so because they had an easy time fielding huge beaters, such as Dragon Rulers and Grapha, and Crazy Box was just big enough to challenge all of those when its effects were negated. This is the first card on this list to have actually seen a lot of competitive play, even if it was just when its effects wouldn't get in the way. And at number 4, we have Blind Obliteration. This is a normal trap card which makes you roll a 6-sided die twice and destroy all face-up monsters in the field with a level and rank lower than the total result. This card saw a little bit of play during Zodiac format as a great way to deal with your opponent's board. Since all the zoos are level or rank 4, you only need to roll about that much to make this card into a dark hole at quick effect speed. These odds were just barely reliable enough as the next best card, Torrential Tribute, was limited to 1 at the time. After the Northern combo nonsense was addressed, Zodiac Mirror shifted to be much more grindy than ever before. Decks would max out on all kinds of spot removal and 1-for-1s like hand traps and kaijus to try to deal with your opponent's Zodiac Trident. Trident mirrors would often come down to whoever managed to get their monsters to stick for a whole turn first, and a card like Blind Obliteration was a great way to try to equalize the game when you were behind on board. One of the biggest advantages this card had over other similar techs was that it couldn't be hit by My Body as a Shield. That card had become increasingly popular around the main and side deck to protect your Zodiacs, since it can negate an effect that would destroy a monster on the field. However, since Blind Obliteration is not guaranteed to destroy anything, as it could roll through a lower and fizzle, it would never be hit with My Body. This card was one of the many reasons people opted to go with Pianissimo instead, as it couldn't be played around as well as My Body could, but just like that card, these both were quickly forgotten once zoos were banned off the meta. And at number 3, we have Morphtronic Telefon. This is a level 1 Earth Machine Tuner monster. When it's in attack position, it can roll a 6-sided die in order to gain life points equal to the result times 100. Then you can special summon a Morphtronic monster with a level equal to or lower than the result from your graveyard. When it's in defense position, you get to excavate cards from top of your deck equal to the dice roll, and then send an excavated Morphtronic card to the graveyard. The most impressive thing about Telefon is its lack of a hard once per turn on either effect, which is something newer cards tend to avoid. It also does not exclude itself from summoning another copy of Morphtronic Telefon from your graveyard. Since this monster is level 1, that means any result on your dice roll means you get to bring back another copy from the graveyard. So if you have a way of getting Telefon on the field and one in the grave, you can continuously link off and bring back Telefons with cards like Linkuriboh to have access to almost infinite fodder. This can not only get you a lot of bodies for link summoning, it can also be used as an FTK engine instead. If instead of linking off the extra Telefons, you use a cannon soldier to send to the graveyard, you can inflict 8,000 points of damage to your opponent on the first turn of the game. The unique part about this FTK is that even if you're prevented from doing burn damage, like being under the effect of your own Dark Ruler no more, it also allows you to gain infinite life points because Telefon also increases your life points. This loop hasn't seen much relevancy in the TCG because its two best enablers, Crystron Halki Fibrax and Curious, got banned not long after Telefon's release. But the Telefon remains one of the easiest FTK loops to execute that are currently in the game, and is technically a card which has a dice roll as part of its effect. And at number 2, we have Snipe Hunter. This is a level 4 Dark Fiend monster with 1500 attack and the effect to pitch a card to target a card on the field and roll a 6-sided die. Then you destroy that target unless you roll a 1 or 6. Despite being a gamble card, Snipe Hunter was one of the biggest staples in early Yu-Gi-Oh's history. It had just the right stats to be an okay beater while in the field, while also a tutorable from the deck with Mystic Tomato. It's a dark, which helped fuel a lot of Chaos Center strategies, helping you fill your requirements for Chaos Sorcerer or Dark Realm Dragon. It did so doubly well because the effect allowed you to discard cards indefinitely, as the effect is not once per turn. This lets you get rid of cards which might be bad in your hand but good in the graveyard, like Destined Hero Malicious, while also popping your opponent's field. Of course, you only had a 2 in 3 chance of actually destroying the targeted card for each of your discards, but sometimes being able to fill up your graveyard was more than good enough. Snipe Hunter was played mostly in Teledad as one of the first tier 0 strategies in the game's history, which centered around Emergency Teleport and Dark Realm Dragon, both cards which had to be hit to 1 for several years afterwards. It lost its main home when the deck was banned off the game, but it was still good enough to see play in a couple of random strategies in time. In the Synchro era, this card was a good answer to Stardust Dragon, as since its effect is not guaranteed to destroy something, it cannot be negated by Stardust. Overall, Snipe Hunter has to be the most popular dice-related card in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and it's only not number 1 because of the raw power of the next spot. And finally, at number 1, we have 6 Cents. This is a normal trap card which requires you to declare 2 numbers from 1 to 6 and then roll a 6-sided die. If the result is one of those 2 numbers, you get to draw that many cards from your deck, and if not, you mill that many cards on top of your deck instead. 6 Cents is by far the strongest effect that has anything to do with dice in the game, as it's actually the only gamble card that's banned. This card has a bit of an interesting story for the TCG, as we only got it a decade after the OCG did, and it was never playable at 3 because it got limited instantly upon release. 6 Cents was only around for a single format, but it was enough to ruin the game for a few months during the Dragon Rule era. The impact this card had on the game was impossible to deal with, as if it resolved favorably, it would win you the game on the spot. The obvious way to use it might just be call 5 or 6, as that would offer you the highest payoff, but what most people did during the format was call 3 or 4. This is because drawing 3 or 4 cards was already enough to win you the game, but also since the rules were all pretty good in the graveyard, milling 5 or 6 cards would also be good enough to give you the game. In this way, you got 4 out of 6 favorable outcomes instead of only 2. Luckily, this card was quickly removed from the format after being playable at 1 for only a couple of months, but it still made a whole Dragon Ruler format way more miserable than it had any right to be in 2013. Despite being both a gamble card and a trap card, 6 Cents effect is so powerful it cannot ever be listed off the list, as there's no shortage of decks that would love a card that can be either a better Pot of Greed or Needlebug Nest most of the time. Out of all the payoffs for a good dice roll we've seen so far, none get even close to this card's potential of making you go +5. For being the strongest gamble card, and the only one which will never get unbanned, it easily makes the first spot on this list. Alright, and that's the video. If you happen to know of any other cards you may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.